We'll get started on today's webinar, which is going to be all about recruitment and why it is broken and how a business should go about thinking about solutions to fix these types of issues. So we've got some slides to go through today. We'll start with some really analysis of the ABS data, what the ABS data is telling us in the marketplace. Good morning, John. Thanks very much for joining us today on the webinar. Hopefully you'll get something out of today as well in your role, and for those also who've joined us on the line. Hopefully we'll grow a few extra people as the session goes on throughout today. So expect that the webinar will take around about 45 minutes to an hour. Feel free to jump in and out as you see fit, but look, there's going to be some excellent content, and I hope you get some great value out of it. So without further ado, let's get started on today's information on this recruitment and how to fix it webinar. I wanted to start by talking about today the current recruitment market, some of the trends around vacancies in particular. Job vacancies, the overall story is that they're at record highs, and ultimately that's feeding into what are challenging times for recruitment for various different businesses. We're going to talk about in-house recruitment, why typically it doesn't work, and why a lot of businesses fail in their own efforts to recruit people themselves. We're going to talk about traditional recruitment agents and why businesses are becoming extremely frustrated with this form of recruitment because simply it's not in their interests for these agents to be effectively giving them results which work for their business in the medium to long term. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the on-demand HR recruitment campaigns method, the methodology, and how we go about campaigns in a very different kind of hybrid model to what businesses are used to dealing with. So without further ado, let's get stuck into some of the key statistics around this. So have a look at this first slide on unemployment. So look at the significant drop in the unemployment rate from around August 20 to February 21. I mean, you're seeing virtually that unemployment rate dropping off a cliff, and I suspect that at the next update, it will be even lower again. We're just seeing this massive competition in the market, and we're really seeing this V-shaped recovery from COVID-19 to the extent where, frankly, even the levels in February, even though, the economy hadn't quite got 100% going at that point, were already well below the figures in the mid 2010s. So certainly promising signs for unemployment, and I think you'll find that in real time, unfortunately, that figure is a couple of months old, but in real time, that unemployment figure is further down than this graph even suggests. So you're literally looking at an unemployment rate that's dropping off a cliff as essentially employment numbers continue to increase at a rate of knots. So let's talk about the monthly hours worked in all jobs seasonally adjusted. So the total number of hours worked indicates that the impact of the removal of JobKeeper may not be as significant as we first thought. We're certainly not seeing as many restructures as we would have anticipated. And in fact, what we're seeing now is a massive shift straight back into hiring and straight back into the hours across all jobs being significantly increased. So those numbers again from the ABS from February showing a very strong recovery, and that's going to continue throughout 2021. Let's get into job vacancies, and this particular graph is staggering. Have a look at these figures around both the total numbers and the private numbers of job vacancies and where they are compared to pre-COVID levels. Have a look at pre-COVID levels, say in February. You're looking at job vacancies around about that 225,000, and now you're looking at figures of way above that already, and that line is just going exponentially up, and I think we're just going to see that continued squeeze for talent going into the latter part of 2021. So this is that's a really important graph, that one, to have a look at and to understand. And I know that probably comes as a big surprise to a number of people who are on the line today. Let's then talk about some of the industry related figures. So the massive rise in vacancies is across the board. And there's a couple of areas where it seems to be a little bit less than the previous figures. Have a look at, for example, accommodation and food services. So back in February 2020, we had 14.7 thousand, 14,700 vacancies in that industry. Now we've got virtually double that amount of vacancies. And I think that for certainly some industries like hospitality, I think they're going to have some real challenging times in 2021, mainly to do with the fact that I think a lot of job seekers or a lot of people in the employment market may have decided to make a permanent shift in their career intentions. I mean, I think some industries, to be fair, looked after people better than others through this COVID. And I think for the businesses who were just, quick to get their employees out the door, quick to put them on stand downs, quick to put them on JobKeeper only arrangements, whilst they may have done that for the survival of their businesses at the time, I think what candidates have done is they've got smarter and they've thought, well, do I want to stay in an industry which is so insecure in respect to employment? And I think they've moved around. There's been this real change in labour moving around. I mean, if you're in the travel industry last year, at the start of it, you've probably already shifted to something else or to another industry. We've been able actually to place travel-related candidates into various different other roles, administrative roles and things like that, and other types of sales roles across the board. So the statistics there tell a pretty compelling story of the figures just going up and up and up across a wide range of industries, even ones you wouldn't expect, like healthcare. You look at other ones like retail trade is still pretty high. You've got construction even, and that's probably part of the construction boom we're seeing at the moment, with a lot of projects and construction businesses still going very, very strong. So yeah, a pretty compelling story there about vacancies. And again, despite what the news might be saying, there are not people lining up on the sidewalks taking or looking to take any job that they're given. Candidates have got more choices than ever before. So if you take one thing away from today's webinar, it's that candidates have choice and candidates have power in this market right now. So very important to know that for everything else we're going to talk about today. Again, mobility. So this talks a little bit about people changing employers or businesses in the past 12 months. We're seeing here that certainly there's an increased mobility of the workforce, and we're certainly seeing that 50% only simply stay if they've been promoted or received an increase. That seems to be a figure that we come back to a lot, that really if you employ someone and they're performing at a satisfactory level of performance or better, that essentially you really need to be looking at what other retention strategies might be available, and also competitors are out there and they're struggling to find people as well, and obviously they're looking for any other means they can go to for the purposes of finding people and for the purposes of headhunting even people who are happy in their particular roles. I'd like to now talk about why recruitment is broken and why businesses are really, really struggling with these things. So I want to talk about both internal recruitment and about recruitment agents. So first of all, I want to talk about the failures of internal recruitment and why businesses continue to be ineffective at this themselves. So first and foremost, businesses generally, if they're trusted with this themselves, they write poor job ads. And we'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about why those job ads are poor and why they're not very well positioned in the market. The second reason that internal recruitment fails is that, generally speaking, it's trusted with a line manager. And generally speaking, that line manager has too many competing priorities and not enough time to properly manage the recruitment effort and the recruitment campaign. So they're doing it amongst all their other day-to-day activities, which isn't enough dedication to the process that is needed. The third thing is that typically we see businesses making decisions that are just too slow in the market. They want to have these, 2 interview processes and cautious approaches to recruitment, and that unfortunately is a luxury that you just cannot afford in this current market. So being agile and quick and decisive in your decision making is far more important than being cautious, sitting back, wanting extra people to check whether a candidate's right or not. Candidates simply, they've got choices and they don't want to wait around for businesses that are taking their time with these things. And I think the most important thing for businesses to remember is that your job is not that important to a candidate. You might think it's very important, but your job is not as important as you think it is to a candidate. The fourth thing that we see often with internal recruitment is that they don't do anything to target passive candidates. It's purely one job board, and generally that's Seek, and that's about it. So they do poorly on that front as well, not putting enough candidates into the funnel, not trying to tap into passive markets. And the other thing that we find with internal recruitment is that they generally have poor skills in respect to even telephone conversations with candidates and the interviewing skills as well. So ultimately what we see is that leads to an overall climate of failure in internal recruitment. Let's now turn our mind to recruitment agents. And look, I've been, in past webinars, and more so I think in the last year or so, I have become increasingly critical of this model that is put out there as a means of finding people for businesses. And I think there's a few problems with it. I think first and foremost, the hefty placement fees are just not justified in most cases for what you are getting. I mean, paying 10 to 20% of OTE for a candidate is just exorbitant. And I think a lot of businesses will adapt and evolve now because they can't afford to pay that in this post-COVID environment. Really, we see this whole notion of database collection, and we'll get a bit into that later, how recruitment agents are just looking to find ultimately what are candidates as products and then sell them to any business that will take them. Ultimately, they're not really looking at what's the best fit for your business. It's more about just trying to find a candidate that's sellable and trying to sell them as quickly as they can for the highest price possible. We also see this notion of reselling candidates after the guaranteed period. And I've seen this recently with a couple of clients. I think it's just highly unethical behaviour where a candidate will sit in a role for 18 months and then the agent's thinking, yeah, you know what, I can sell that candidate to someone else now and get another placement fee. And with little or no regard to the previous, $10 or $15 or $20,000 that the business paid 18 months ago or 2 years ago to recruit that candidate in the first place. So it's the loyalty there to the business in a lot of cases is lacking, and we see that as another real problem. And I think the other issue with recruitment agents and how they operate is their generic and cryptic and private job advertisements, which they will say is in the interest of your business. You want to run a private campaign. You don't want to have candidates making inquiries with you directly. But that really notion is a complete nonsense. And I want to talk about that a little bit more today and why I really challenge that philosophy. And I think that businesses ultimately, if you look at both of these parts of this particular slide, the overall approach, if you are going down the internal path, is often that there's a lack of ability to deliver a good recruitment campaign, and there's failure on that part. And then we go through this vicious cycle of internal recruitment fails, and then we think, well, we've got to go to an agent, and then that fails as well because we get poor value for money. We're getting poor candidates, ones that 3-month guarantees, pathetic. I mean, a lot of candidates in roles are not going to be able to demonstrate whether they are capable of them long term in only a period of 3 months. Then after 3 months, you've lost your guarantee, and even if you get out in the 3 months, all you're probably going to get back to the agent is a credit or an option to replace the candidate. So again, not very good value for money for the business. And look, there is some good agents out there, but I would say that the majority of the ones that we've dealt with and the majority of the ones that our clients have dealt with in the past have certainly been very questionable in some of their approaches. So we'll continue to work through this as we talk throughout the presentation. So I'd like to now talk about in-house recruitment. So the first failure we see in the poor job advertisements, just getting into a little bit more detail now, is that typically the ads don't sell the business well enough and they don't sell the opportunity well enough. So they're the first two failures. They don't really think about, well, what can we do to make our business stand out from another business? All they end up doing is just describing the role and what they're looking for. They're not actually thinking about selling the role or the opportunity to the candidate. So that's something we see as a real problem in internal recruitment. The second thing we see is unnecessary criteria. So putting things in waffle statements like can-do attitude, works well within a team, things that no candidate is going to rule themselves out. They're not going to sit there and look at a job ad and go, you know what, I haven't got a can-do attitude. I'm not going to apply for this particular role. So eliminating those unnecessary criteria that really don't screen anyone out. You've got to be specific about criteria and what you're looking for in a particular role, and you don't need to add those ridiculous or unnecessary things into that particular into those categories. So the other thing we see with businesses is a poor use of the job title for the market, and we see a lot of businesses focusing on what I would call internal jargon. So they use their internal titles for the purposes of advertising without actually thinking, well, what sort of candidates are we actually looking for in the marketplace? They think about, oh, we'll just use our internal title, which might not work very well for the purposes of positioning an ad in the market. What you want to think about when you go with a title is, okay, what title is going to attract the candidates we want, and what title is going to be good on search engines when we put it across the various different job boards. So they're the failures on the poor job advertisements when it's done in-house. The other failure, as I mentioned, is too many day-to-day operational priorities, and this leads into the fast-moving market. So the candidates now, don't be stupid and don't be naive to think they're only applying for your role. Candidates are applying for multiple opportunities at once, and they are looking for responses within that first 12 to 24 hours. They're not waiting 5, 6, 7 days for you to sit on a hammock on Sunday and read through the applications that you got that you placed an ad for last Monday. Those days are over, guys. I'm sorry to say. You need to be responsive. You need to be looking at candidates applying within 12 to 24 hours. And if you're not doing that, and if you're not making contact with those candidates quickly, then you are not fit and cut out to be doing internal recruitment in your business. Simple as that. You need to be looking at an alternative, and we'll talk a little bit about what an alternative with on-demand HR might look like, and or a hybrid model that we suggest to clients. So, and what I would say is that most businesses tend to advertise their roles at the market. So, most businesses, with the exception of a few, will advertise a role that in salary terms and benefit terms is about in line with what the market expects. And therefore, the only way that you get ahead of the pack is to be more responsive than the pack. If you're waiting, for days and days after, it's like any situation in business. If your product costs the same as another business, and if your product has similar specs than any other business, well then what else is it that your product can do to sell better into the market? And the same applies with recruitment. Your product, in this case the job, sells or is worth the same amount of money as another. It's got similar specs, and what can we do to position that role better than our competitors or better than other equivalent roles? So think about recruitment as similar to how we would do any of our other day-to-day business. Again, with in-house recruitment, typically another fault is that they advertise on one board only, seek.com, and that's it. Nothing else, no other job boards, and no reach of passive candidates. So generally, there's no effort on social media, looking at community job boards, looking at other ways of extending the reach of the ad and bringing more candidates into what I call the funnel. We then also have an issue with inexperienced line managers who might be great at what they do, but they're not very good at articulating or selling what's required in the role, particularly when they make the first contact with a candidate. And that's a very, people talk about first impressions with a lot of things. Same applies with recruitment. I mean, we talk about first impressions with our products and our contact with our clients in relation to sales, but when it comes to recruitment, it seems like anyone and their dog can just ring up a candidate and sell a role, and that really is not the case. And you'll see that candidates will respond well to situations where they can have a good professional contact and where they can clearly articulate the role and take decisive action on the next steps. So the other thing we see with businesses failing in this regard is they waste time on looking through candidates who don't meet what we call the minimum criteria, which might be things like the candidates who are located too far away, who don't have full working rights, or with salary expectations that are too high for what they're looking for. So they do waste time on those types of candidates in getting to really other candidates that they should be looking at more closely. So a lack of focus is probably the best way of rounding that particular set of things out. So that's a bit about the in-house recruitment. We then talk about agents and traditional recruitment agents, so to speak. So most of these will place roles in the vicinity of 10 to 20% of OTE on target earnings. So that could be anything from, it could be $10,000 to $20,000 in some cases, sometimes a little bit less than that. But the value for money in this is very, very questionable, I think, for the results. And we're seeing more and more clients move away from this particular model. And we see a lot of database collection. We see, agents running what we think are suspect ads where there may not even be an opportunity for a role. It's just a database collection of candidates for sales roles or various different other types of roles. And interviews that these agents conduct, and again, I say the majority, I don't say all, but the majority, they're really just looking at, what candidate I can sell into a business, not really looking for what's the best candidate for this particular business. So that's the agent model. And again, talking more about this, the agent promotes that they have a database of candidates or potential candidates. And I guess you've got to ask yourself, well, with the unemployment numbers as low as they are, if a candidate's a quality candidate, are they really sitting on a recruitment company's database for months for them to be waiting to be placed out to a business? I find that just doesn't add up. So are they really a quality candidate is my first question. And then the resold factor is, I think, it's a conflict of interest. I think it's not right to be reselling a candidate that you had placed with one client to another client 18 months later. And ask yourself, well, if I place with an agent, is that going to happen to me in 18 months after I've already paid my hefty fee and after I've got very little guarantee of, what's going to happen with that person? The other thing is that, look, we find in general that the agent model, it's ineffective for low to mid-tier roles, 50 to 150K. It does have some benefit in the higher end roles where headhunting is a necessity. So, senior executive roles where people are trying to be encouraged to come across. Yes, there is a place for agents in that market, but I think the bulk of the market, the 50 to 150K, I see that as just a space where I don't think what they offer is effective, particularly not at 10 to 20% of on-target earnings. And the agent always promotes, you want to run a private campaign. You don't want candidates contacting you directly. And this is all self-serving stuff. All this does is protects the recruitment agent's business model. That's all it does. That they don't want a candidate to come to you directly because, again, it compromises their model of them placing the candidate. They don't want another company finding out, or another recruitment agent finding out what the ad is all about on the boards, because again, that would allow them to place a candidate with your company. So the whole private, you want to run a private, we want you to run a private campaign. We don't want you to be getting any applications yourself. We want to take care of everything for you. And, we want it to be confidential, and all that kind of rhetoric is just rubbish. And honestly, we'll talk more about that as we go throughout today's presentation. And placing a well-branded company campaign is always the best method for recruiting in this particular area, and in particularly those low to mid-tier roles. So I want to look at, here's a great example of what we're talking about. So here's an advert for a sales representative. First and foremost, the brand, it's they're promoting their brand, the recruitment agent's brand, not your brand. So you might have a great brand to celebrate, but in this ad, it's not being celebrated. Simple as that. No reference at all to the employer's name in this ad, for the self-serving and self-interest of protecting competitors or other agents from stealing their client that they're trying to place this person for. Candidates look at these ads, not necessarily this one, but generally these ads, and think, is this even a real job, or is this a fishing expedition for candidates to grow recruitment agents' databases? And again, this ad is unable to sell the additional benefits of the company and the company's brand Otherwise, it gives away the name of the client. So there are just straight away 4 problems already with this methodology of agent recruitment. Let's now get to this hybrid recruitment campaign and the concept of it, because I think it's hard for businesses to understand. So first of all, and I'm going to try and make this really, really easy, and you will understand it by the time I'm through with this. But we've got internal recruitment failing. We've got external agents and that method of recruitment failing. So how do we come up with a method of recruitment that's going to work for our business? So the problem internally is the expertise not having enough time. The problem with external is more than anything, it's the model. It's the OTE, it's the placement fee cost. And that model that's the problem. It's not the problem that it's external. The problem is the model, the business model of the recruitment agents. So what does a hybrid recruitment campaign look like? A hybrid recruitment campaign is an external party managing a company branded recruitment campaign. And what that allows you to do, first of all, is this: develop an advertisement that accurately reflects your role and your business. It sells the benefits of your brand, and we can offer advice in our example of salary benchmarking, where your role is positioned in relation to the market, and the external party, certainly on-demand HR is one that can offer this. We can write an ad that's more effective than you can write one internally. And the very, very, very small downside of a company branded recruitment campaign is that, yes, you might get the occasional call from a candidate directly. It's pretty rare though. Most candidates will follow the instructions they're given on the ad, either through submitting an application online or contacting us directly. But you may get the occasional candidate who wants to call the business direct, and that's not a bad thing anyway, because they're just showing that little bit of extra initiative for a role. So the drafting of the advertisement is generally handled in our case, on-demand HR's recruitment campaigns in a much more effective manner than it would be done internally, without having to deal with the external business model of the agents. We then talk about putting the advert on multiple platforms. So generally we would place a standout ad on Seek. We generally position your corporate brand, your logo, and any videos you might have about your recruitment branding. We generally also look at other boards like Indeed, Jura, Gumtree, and other typical boards to maximize reach. We might use for graduate roles, university boards as well, which is a fantastic type of method of searching for different candidates. We also look at using Seek Talent Search where required, where we can actually proactively approach candidates with a role if they are an active job seeker without necessarily them having applied for the role in first instance. So again, posting on multiple platforms is important, and then knowing what platforms are going to work is important, and obviously looking at other ways to find passive candidates, which then dovetails into social media strategy. And that is where we take either your Seek ad, your Indeed ad, or something else, and look at then positioning that on social media through community job boards, community pages, even some of your typical mums and dads groups on social media can be very, very effective at creating extra reach for candidates, but not only extra reach, putting it under the noses of passive candidates who might not be looking for a job on the boards, who might stumble across it on Facebook or on LinkedIn or something else, seeing a role that they think, oh, that's great for me. I wasn't really looking, but I've seen this role, and that's certainly to my interest. So it boosts the number of views and applications through having some social media presence out there. And again, because you've got to remember with the job boards, particularly Seek, the way it works is you place your ad and then it falls down the list over time. So again, that's something that we do offer as part of a hybrid recruitment campaign. So externally managed company branded campaign. The critical thing where we make a big difference in these recruitment campaigns is the phone screening. So we tend to act on these very, very quick. So we tend to, as soon as candidates start coming in, first 12, 24 hours, we're talking with our client, we're saying, we want to phone screen these people. Are you okay for us to do that? And then we make contact with those candidates in the first 24, 48 hours, trying to engage with them straight away, trying to capture them before the competitors have, and because again, they're applying for multiple roles, and we will then, following those phone screens, make recommendations for interview very, very quickly so that we can respond to the best talent available before anyone else snaps that talent up. And where we find internals fail is that the businesses generally wait too long to do this stuff, and they miss out on the good candidates, left with the not so good candidates in the pack. So we are very robust with that phone screening and comprehensive in what we ask, and typically we can do those things very quickly following the application receipt. Then what we do is schedule the interviews based on your availability. So we'll talk with candidates straight away about interview dates if we think they are good in and during the phone screen. So we'll give you a friendly reminder of the urgency of scheduling interviews. We will not let you stuff around, say, yep, I can be available for interviews in 2 weeks. I will promise you one thing, that if you say to us, we are available for interviews in 2 weeks, we will be very, very blunt with you and say that that's not going to be good enough to secure the best talent in this market unless you want to pay way over the odds. If you want to pay at the market, you have to be responsive, and we will constantly remind you to be responsive. So again, that's one of the key mindset shifts that businesses need to go through. And again, what we will do is we'll field any questions and concerns from the candidate. We'll close the candidate for interview, and especially those who have obviously identified that they meet with the requirements of the role through either the initial application process or the screening process. So then where we hand it over to the client typically is at the interview stage. This is where we've already sold the benefits of the role, we've got the candidate in there, and this is really the pointy end of the campaign. So we've shortlisted, we've phone screened, and we put the business now in a position where it's in a position to make a decision about a candidate. And we'll try and make that, those candidates give you as many as you need, but no more than you need. And at this point, we're really looking at the serious candidates. We've screened out the average ones, or we've screened out the good from the average at the phone screen stage, and we're now giving you the best candidates to look at. And again, fast response. And what we can offer you as part of that interviewing process is training on how to be effective in these interviews, and give you lists of questions and things like that to determine if this candidate is right for your particular role. What we then follow up with is the post-interview feedback. So we will come to you and say, how did that interview go? And what can we say to that candidate? A lot of businesses fail in this regard. What they do is they say, they have an interview, and then it's just silence for a week, 2 weeks. Well, that's not inspiring any confidence in the candidate. How does a candidate feel spending their time in a phone screen, applying a face-to-face interview, only for an employer to just sit back and wait and do nothing with that in a week? We look at following up, particularly for candidates who are certainly still in the mix for the role. We look at following up, providing post-interview feedback straight away. But even for those who wouldn't be in the mix after that, even for the candidates that perhaps didn't interview so well, you want to have a good recruitment brand, and you want to be providing that post-interview feedback in a timely manner to keep, as I said, your brand good, and just to be, just to provide common courtesy to people that you are, a good employer and you've got a good recruitment process. The next thing we would do is, if you've made decisions on who you are seriously considering and you are close to the offer stage, we would then look at reference checking. So we would typically conduct an external reference check for you with, again, some comprehensive and standardized reference checks for the remaining candidates. We then look at highlighting any last minute flags. And sometimes we do pick up things at the last minute that, we will highlight as a red flag. And again, we are not selling you a candidate. So a recruitment agent's never going to say there's a red flag with any of their candidates. They're never ever going to say there might be a problem with this candidate, or they're never going to give you a reference check if they've done one that is going to be negative, because quite frankly, it doesn't fit their business model for them to give you anything negative about that candidate. We, on the other hand, we don't care what candidate gets the role. We'll give you multiple options. We don't care what candidate gets the role. And not only that, most of our clients that work with us, they work with us on both the HR and recruitment front. So if we hire someone, or not we hire, but if you hire someone bad from the campaign, and look, you're never going to get every single placement right, or you're never going to get every single hire right. That's just a fact of life. but we can assist you then dealing with the problem thereafter. There will be campaigns that won't work out. There will be candidates that won't work out. I would, that's just part and parcel of running a business, and these things happen. So again, the reference check is designed to pick up any red flags so that we can flag this to you before you make a final decision. And then we get to offer negotiations. This is another thing that we're very good at, is that we can, talk to them about the offer. We can prepare the offer of employment for you, assisting all the pre-employment paperwork. We can coordinate any pre-employment checks in accordance with your company policies and procedures. Again, those things should not take too long. If you've got a medical check that you require, if you've got a police check you require, it needs to be done quickly. Not stuffing around, not waiting for people to come back to you, not waiting for second interviews, not waiting for approval from head office. All this stuff is all, it might be great for you to waffle on about internally, but at the end of the day, all the candidate cares about is, okay, what offers and options are in front of me, and what is the most appealing right now. That's what the candidate's thinking about. They don't care if you've got to go and get approval from a senior manager and that's going to take a week. That the candidate does not care about that. The candidate cares about where they're at with things and what are their best options at any given time. Then we get to the I guess just as though sort of wrapping up today's presentation really is about what we do offer. So all those things we just spoke about in relation to that hybrid model, it is something that on-demand HR recruitment campaigns offers. And we don't guarantee placements, but what we will do is we'll run a campaign for as long as it takes with no additional fees to find that particular person. And sometimes that might mean modifying the job campaign. That might mean modifying the title. That might mean looking for a lower level role. Or sometimes a client will come to us and say, we're looking for this role. It's $60,000 to $70,000 is what we're prepared to offer. We go to market and we realize that that's inadequate. So then we say to the client, well, look, we might need to run this ad for a second time, or these ads and this social media campaign for a second time. We're probably going to have to go up on the salary, or alternatively go down on our expectations. We might have to look at a more junior role in these situations. So again, this is where we will provide you with the advice. We're not interested in just putting a bum on a seat. That's not the way this works. Again, the agent model, it's about bum on a seat, get my fee, get past the 3-month guarantee, and then the client can't do anything after that. So most of our recruitment campaigns, we charge at a flat fee of $2,500 plus GST. It's not based on a percentage or the salary of hours worked. We'll work on the campaign as long as it's needed. So typically we have a very high success of placement in the first round of advertisements. If you have a second round of advertisements, the placement would be even higher. And then if you're going into, sometimes we go into 3 rounds. Some roles are difficult to fill. And sometimes we'll go into a 3rd round of adverts. And again, you're getting peace of mind that that's part of your flat fee. You can run that campaign for as long as you need to find someone. So again, the other thing we do is we do offer recruitment and retention as an option as part of our monthly memberships. And look, if you want to know more about what on-demand HR can offer in the recruitment space, please send us an email at recruitment@ondemandhr.com.au. We'll visit our website, www.ondemandhr.com.au. So that is essentially some summary of today's presentation. Again, I just want to go through that hybrid model one more time for everyone today. And I will open it up for some final questions before we wrap up. But ultimately, what the hybrid model looks like, again, is company branded campaign managed externally by someone who has the time and the expertise to do it. So you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting, I'm running a company branded campaign, I'm celebrating my brand, and I have someone competent who's going to manage it. I don't have to worry about the business model of the recruitment agent putting a bum on a seat and trying to get 10 to 20% of OTE of money out of me for a bugger all 3-month guarantee. So then we talk about the method. The method is we draft the advertisement with professional training on how the best way to do it is. Avoiding all those mistakes we spoke about. Posting on multiple platforms. Social media strategy. Shortlisting and phone screening as quickly as possible. Scheduling of interviews as quickly as possible. Then the interviews, which are carried out by the business, and we give you training and instruction on how to do that. The post-interview feedback, following up with the candidates, particularly who are still in the mix, but all candidates to keep the recruitment brand strong. The reference checking is next. We then talk about offer negotiations, and then we talk about the employment contracts and the checks. I'd like to thank everyone who did participate in today's session. Hopefully we can give you some real insight on, recruitment campaigning. And we call it campaigning because it is different from that agent model. I don't want to talk about the word placement. I don't want to talk about the word candidate. I want to talk about recruitment campaigning and running an effective recruitment effort and finding someone from that recruitment effort. It's not about placing a candidate. It's about running a good campaign for the business to then ultimately find someone who's going to be a good hire for that organization. So look, once again, my name's Clint Indrell. Thanks very much for your time today, and thanks very much for your participation in this webinar. We will certainly be sharing this with our networks on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on our website. So for anyone who might be interested in passing this on to their friends to view again, certainly this will be available as a video in the near future. Once again, thanks very much for your time, and from On Demand HR, it's goodbye and have a great weekend.